Some secrets are buried so deep that only the desperate dare to dig them up. The wind howled like a wounded animal as Dr. Elena Vasquez pushed through the heavy oak doors of Timber Creek Lodge, snow swirling around her pregnant form. She'd been driving for hours through the Colorado mountains when the blizzard forced her off the highway, seeking any shelter she could find. The lodge appeared abandoned, its windows dark except for a single light flickering in the main hall. What Elena discovered inside defied all logic. Walls covered floor to ceiling with missing person posters, faces of men, women, and children who'd vanished without a trace. Her medical training had taught her to stay calm under pressure, but nothing could have prepared her for what she saw pinned to the far wall, a poster bearing her dead husband's photograph, dated just 3 weeks ago. Marcus had been gone for 6 months. She'd attended his funeral, mourned his loss, carried his child through her grief. Yet here was proof that someone believed he was still alive, still missing, still out there somewhere in these treacherous mountains. As Elena's trembling fingers traced the familiar features of the man she'd loved and buried, one terrifying question consumed her thoughts. If Marcus wasn't really dead, then who was the father of her unborn child? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena's legs nearly buckled beneath her, the weight of 8 months of pregnancy suddenly unbearable. She gripped the rough wooden wall for support, her medical bag sliding from her shoulder and hitting the floor with a dull thud. The fluorescent emergency light overhead flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows across Marcus's familiar smile, a smile she'd kissed goodbye on that final morning when he'd left for what should have been a routine patrol. The poster was crisp, recent, not weathered like the others surrounding it. Someone had placed it here deliberately recently. Her eyes scanned the details. Marcus Vasquez, 36, missing since November 15th. Last seen near Timber Creek Trail. Contact Park Service with any information. November 15th, 3 weeks ago. But Marcus had died on June 3rd. She remembered because it had been their anniversary. 5 years of marriage, ended by a phone call from his supervisor about a climbing accident while pursuing poachers. She'd identified his body herself, though the fall had damaged him. The closed casket funeral felt like yesterday. A sharp kick from the baby jolted her back to the present. Elena pressed her palm to her swollen belly, trying to steady her breathing. The child inside her was Marcus's, conceived during their last weekend together in May, a perfect memory now tainted by impossible questions. She'd clung to this pregnancy as her connection to him, her reason to keep going through the crushing grief. The lodge creaked around her, old timber settling under the weight of snow. She pulled out her phone, hoping for signal, but the screen showed only empty bars. The blizzard had cut her off from everything. Her sister Carmen waiting in Denver, her colleagues at Denver General who thought she was taking early maternity leave, the carefully constructed life she'd rebuilt after losing Marcus. Elena forced herself to examine the other posters. Dozens of faces stared back at her. A teenage girl with braces, an elderly man in a fishing vest, a young mother holding a toddler. The dates spanned 10 years, but there was something systematic about them, something that made her physician's mind search for patterns. Most were local disappearances, people who'd vanished while hiking, camping, or hunting in these mountains. But why was this lodge abandoned if people were still going missing? Why were these posters displayed like some macabre gallery instead of distributed to authorities? She moved deeper into the main hall, her footsteps echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The furniture was covered in dust sheets, and cobwebs draped the massive stone fireplace like funeral shrouds. Yet the air held a faint scent of coffee, something recent that didn't belong in an abandoned building. Behind the reception desk, she found a logbook left open. The last entry was dated today, her own name scrawled in handwriting she didn't recognize. Dr. Elena Vasquez, arriving evening of December 22nd. Someone had been expecting her. The baby kicked again, more insistently, and Elena realized she'd been standing in the cold lodge for nearly 20 minutes. Her core temperature was dropping, which meant the baby's was too. Whatever was happening here, she needed warmth and safety first. Questions could wait until she and her child were out of danger. She found the lodge's main electrical panel and managed to restore power to the heating system. Ancient radiators clanged to life throughout the building. In the kitchen, she discovered canned goods that weren't expired and bottled water that tasted clean. Someone had been maintaining this place despite its abandoned appearance. As warmth slowly returned to the building, Elena settled into a chair near the fireplace, trying to process everything. 6 months ago, she'd been Dr. Elena Vasquez, emergency physician, devoted wife, planning to start a family. Marcus's death had shattered that world, leaving her to rebuild around grief and single motherhood. She'd thrown herself into her work, pulling double shifts to avoid the empty house they'd shared, making plans to move closer to Carmen after the baby arrived. Now, staring at her husband's face on that impossible poster, she felt the ground shifting beneath her again. If Marcus wasn't dead, where had he been for 6 months? Why hadn't he contacted her? And if he was dead, who had placed that poster, and why? The wind outside intensified, rattling windows and making the lodge feel even more isolated. Elena's phone remained useless, and her car was buried under snow in the parking lot. She was trapped here until the storm passed, trapped with questions that threatened everything she thought she knew about her life. She closed her eyes and felt the baby's gentle movements, a reminder that she wasn't just responsible for herself anymore. Tomorrow, she would find answers. Tomorrow, she would call the authorities, demand explanations, get to the bottom of this nightmare. But tonight, as the blizzard raged and the lodge settled into uneasy silence around her, Elena couldn't escape the growing certainty that Marcus's death had been the beginning of something much darker than grief, something that had followed her into these mountains and wasn't finished with her yet. Elena sat motionless in the dusty chair, one hand cradling her belly while the other gripped the armrest until her knuckles turned white. The baby had finally settled, responding to her stillness, but her mind raced through memories she'd carefully catalogued and stored away. 6 months of grief had taught her to compartmentalize, to function despite the gaping hole Marcus's death had torn in her world. Before June 3rd, her life had been beautifully ordinary. She'd wake at 5:30 a.m. to Marcus brewing coffee in their kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows of their Boulder home. He'd kiss her goodbye at 6:45, uniform crisp, ranger badge gleaming, promising to call during his lunch break. She'd drive to Denver General, where she'd spend 12-hour shifts in the emergency department, stitching wounds and saving lives, anchored by the knowledge that Marcus would be waiting when she got home. They'd fallen into comfortable rhythms over 5 years of marriage. Thursday nights were for grocery shopping together, Marcus insisting on reading every label while Elena grew impatient in the cereal aisle. Weekends meant hiking the trails he knew like scripture, his hands steady on her elbow when the path grew treacherous. Sunday mornings in bed, planning the family they'd start when the time was right. The time had finally felt right that last weekend in May. They'd talked about names. Isabella for a girl, after Elena's grandmother, David for a boy, after Marcus's father who died when Marcus was 12. Marcus had placed his palm on her still flat stomach 2 weeks later, when the pregnancy test showed positive, his eyes bright with tears of joy. "She's going to be beautiful like her mama," he'd whispered, already convinced they were having a daughter. Now Elena pressed that same spot where his hand had rested, feeling Isabella, because the ultrasound had proved Marcus right, respond with a flutter of movement. This child was supposed to be their bridge to the future, proof that love could create something lasting. Instead, Isabella had become Elena's sole lifeline, the only thing preventing her from drowning completely in the aftermath of Marcus's death. The past 6 months blurred together in her memory, a haze of funeral arrangements, insurance paperwork, and well-meaning colleagues insisting she take time off. Carmen had flown in from Denver, practical and fierce, handling the details Elena couldn't face. The closed casket service at St. Catherine's, Marcus's ranger colleagues in dress uniforms, his supervisor Tom Bradley delivering a eulogy about duty and sacrifice that felt hollow against Elena's raw grief. She'd returned to work after 3 weeks, because the emergency room demanded her complete attention. Trauma cases left no room for self-pity. Gunshot wounds, car accidents, overdoses, heart attacks. She could lose herself in other people's crises. Her medical training overriding emotional paralysis. Dr. Martinez, the chief of emergency medicine, had watched her with concerned eyes but never questioned her ability to function. "Take care of yourself, Elena," he'd said after she'd worked her 4th consecutive double shift. "The department needs you, but not at the expense of your health or the babies." But work was easier than going home to the house she and Marcus had bought together, where his coffee mug still sat in the dishwasher and his hiking boots remained by the front door. She'd finally packed his clothes 2 months ago, donating them to charity, but kept his cologne on the bathroom counter. Sometimes she'd spray it on her pillow, pretending he was still there. The practical decisions had been overwhelming. Sell the house or keep it, stay in Boulder or move to Denver near Carmen. She'd chosen change, putting the house on the market and accepting a position at Denver General that would start after her maternity leave. A fresh start, somewhere without Marcus's ghost in every room. Carmen had been her anchor through it all. Older by 3 years, divorced, childless by choice, with a successful law practice and an apartment large enough for Elena and the baby. "You need family," Carmen had insisted during one of their weekly phone calls. "Isabella needs her aunt, and you need someone who'll tell you the truth instead of handling you with kid gloves." The truth. Elena almost laughed at the irony, staring across the lodge's main hall at Marcus's impossible face among the missing persons posters. What was truth anymore? She'd built her entire identity around being Marcus's wife, then Marcus's widow, then the mother of Marcus's child. She'd grieved for 6 months, planning a future as a single mother, carrying his memory like a sacred burden. Now she didn't know what any of it meant. Had their marriage been real? Had Marcus loved her, or had she been part of some elaborate deception? Was Isabella really his daughter, or had Elena been unknowingly used for something darker than she could imagine? The radiators continued their rhythmic clanging, filling the lodge with artificial warmth that couldn't touch the chill spreading through Elena's chest. Tomorrow, when the storm passed, she would have to confront the possibility that everything she'd built her life around had been a lie. Tonight, trapped between her memories and the truth those posters promised, she could only sit and feel Isabella moving inside her, the one constant in a world that had shifted beneath her feet twice in 6 months. The sound came at 2:17 m.m. Elena knew because she'd been checking her phone compulsively, watching the minutes crawl by while sleep remained impossible. It was subtle at first, a rhythmic scraping that could have been branches against windows or settling timber. But as she lay on the lobby's ancient leather couch, her medical training had her cataloging sounds the way she triaged patients. Normal, concerning, or immediately dangerous. This fell somewhere between concerning and dangerous. She'd fashioned a makeshift bed from cushions and a moth-eaten wool blanket she'd found in a hall closet, positioning herself where she could see both the front entrance and the corridor leading deeper into the lodge. The building had felt safer once the heat kicked in, but safety was relative when you were 8 months pregnant and stranded in a place that displayed your dead husband's face like a trophy. The scraping came again, more deliberate this time. Footsteps on wooden flooring, slow and careful. Elena's pulse spiked, sending adrenaline through her system that made Isabella kick restlessly. She forced herself to breathe slowly. Panic wouldn't help either of them, while her mind raced through possibilities. An animal seeking shelter, the building settling under snow weight, or something that required her to make a choice between hiding and confronting the unknown. The emergency lighting cast everything in harsh shadows, turning familiar shapes sinister. Elena eased herself upright, grateful that her work in emergency medicine had taught her to function under pressure. Every night shift brought the unexpected. Overdoses that turned violent, accident victims who weren't what they seemed, situations that required split-second decisions with incomplete information. But this was different. This was personal in ways that made her professional detachment crumble. A door creaked open somewhere in the lodge's depths, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots on hardwood. Measured steps, purposeful. Someone was moving through the building with the confidence of familiarity, Elena's hand instinctively moved to her medical bag, where she kept emergency supplies including a scalpel, hardly a weapon, but better than nothing. The footsteps grew closer, approaching the main hall from the direction of what appeared to be administrative offices. Elena had explored those rooms briefly while searching for blankets, finding them filled with filing cabinets and dusty paperwork. Normal lodge business, or so she'd thought. Now she wondered what else might be hidden in those files. She had seconds to decide: confront whoever was approaching or hide and hope they'd leave without discovering her. The logical choice was hiding. She was pregnant, alone, and had no idea who was coming or what they wanted, but logic warred with the desperate need for answers about Marcus, about why his face was on that poster, about why someone had written her name in the guest register before she'd arrived. The footsteps paused just outside the main hall entrance. Elena made her choice. "I can hear you," she called out, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I'm not leaving until I get answers." Silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then a figure stepped into the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a thick winter coat that obscured most details. The emergency lighting created a harsh silhouette, making it impossible to see facial features clearly. "Dr. Vasquez." The voice was male, gravelly, tinged with what might have been surprise. "You weren't supposed to be here yet." Yet, as if her arrival had been anticipated but mistimed. "Who are you?" Elena struggled to her feet, using the couch arm for support. Isabella's weight made quick movements impossible, but she needed to see this person's face. "How do you know my name?" The figure stepped forward, and the light caught weathered features she didn't recognize. A man in his 50s, grey beard, eyes that held the kind of wariness she associated with long-term trauma patients. He looked like he belonged in these mountains, someone accustomed to harsh winters and harder choices. "My name is William Patterson," he said, removing his wool cap. "I've been maintaining this place, waiting for people who need somewhere safe to disappear." Disappear. The word hit Elena like a physical blow, connecting dots she'd been afraid to acknowledge. The missing persons posters, the maintained supplies in an abandoned lodge, Marcus's impossible presence among the vanished. Is my husband alive? The question tore from her throat before she could stop it. Patterson's expression shifted, becoming almost gentle. "That's complicated. There are things you need to understand about Marcus, about why he had to leave, about why bringing you here might be the only way to keep you and your daughter safe." "Safe from what?" Elena wanted to scream, but Isabella chose that moment to deliver a sharp kick that nearly buckled her knees. The baby's movements had grown more urgent over the past hour, responding to Elena's stress in ways that made her physician instincts flare with concern. Patterson noticed her distress immediately. "When's your due date?" 4 weeks, Elena managed. "And when did you last feel normal fetal movement?" The clinical question, delivered with obvious medical knowledge, made Elena's blood run cold. This wasn't a chance encounter. This man knew exactly who she was, when she was due, probably everything about the pregnancy that had been her only certainty in a world gone mad. She faced a choice that would determine everything: trust this stranger with answers about Marcus, or run into a blizzard that could kill them both. Elena stared at Patterson, her medical instincts warring with every rational thought screaming at her to flee. The clinical precision of his questions about her pregnancy felt like a violation, intimate knowledge that no stranger should possess. Yet here she stood, 8 months pregnant, and trapped by a blizzard that would kill her faster than whatever threat this man might represent. "How do you know about my due date?" she whispered, backing against the couch. Isabella rolled restlessly, responding to the spike in Elena's heart rate. "How do you know any of this?" Patterson remained still, hands visible, his posture carefully non-threatening. But Elena had seen enough predators in the emergency room to know that monsters rarely looked the part. The domestic violence cases always involved men who seemed gentle, apologetic, concerned about their victims' well-being, right up until the moment they struck again. "Marcus told me," Patterson said simply, "before he disappeared, before he had to become someone else." The words should have brought relief. confirmation that Marcus was alive, that 6 months of grief had been unnecessary. Instead, they opened a chasm of doubt that made Elena's knees weak. If Marcus was alive, why hadn't he contacted her? Why had he let her mourn him, plan a future as a single mother, rebuild her entire world around his absence? "You're lying." But even as she said it, Elena knew it wasn't true. There were too many details that fit: the prepared guest registry, the maintained lodge, Patterson's medical knowledge. This wasn't random. If Marcus is alive, where is he? Why would he— her voice cracked. Why would he let me think he was dead? Patterson's expression grew pained. Because the alternative was worse. Because the people he was investigating, the people who wanted him dead, they would have come for you next, for the baby. What people? The question came out as a demand, her emergency room voice that brooked no evasion from patients trying to hide overdoses or abuse. What was Marcus involved in? But Patterson was already shaking his head. Not here, not like this. There are protocols, safety measures. Protocols? Elena's voice rose dangerously. Isabella responded with sharp kicks that made her gasp. I'm 8 months pregnant. I've been grieving my husband for 6 months, and you're talking about protocols? The baby's movements were becoming genuinely concerning now. Not the gentle rolls she'd grown accustomed to, but urgent, distressed patterns that made Elena's physician instincts override everything else. She pressed both hands to her belly, trying to calm Isabella, while her own pulse hammered against her temples. Patterson stepped closer, his medical training evident in how he assessed her condition. You need to sit down. Stress isn't good for either of you. Don't. Elena held up a hand, stopping him. Don't you dare tell me what's good for my baby. Don't pretend to care about our well-being when you've been part of whatever sick game this is. But she did sink back onto the couch, because standing was becoming impossible and Isabella needed her to be stable. The baby's frantic movement was triggering Braxton Hicks contractions, not real labor, but her body's warning that she was approaching dangerous stress levels. The rational part of Elena's mind, the part trained to function in crisis situations, was cataloging facts. Patterson knew medical terminology. He'd been maintaining this lodge. He claimed Marcus was alive but hiding. The missing persons posters suggested an organized operation, people who'd been forced to disappear rather than simply vanishing. If Marcus was involved, it meant their entire marriage had been built on lies. When? She asked quietly, her hands still pressed protectively over Isabella. When did he tell you about the baby? Before we got married? Before I got pregnant? How long has this been planned? Patterson's silence was answer enough. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the foundation of her identity cracking apart. 5 years of marriage, 6 months of grief, and now this, the discovery that she'd never really known the man she'd loved. Had Marcus married her because he cared about her, or because she served some purpose in whatever conspiracy had consumed his life? The baby, she said suddenly, terror making her voice sharp. Is she even his? Elena, you need to calm down. Don't say my name. The words came out fierce and broken. Don't pretend we know each other. Don't act like you care about me when you've been watching me, planning something, using my pregnancy for whatever this is. Isabella's movements were becoming genuinely painful now. Stress-induced patterns that Elena recognized from her obstetric rotations. She needed to regulate her breathing, lower her blood pressure, create the calm environment her daughter needed. But how could she find calm when everything she'd believed about her life was disintegrating? Outside, the blizzard continued its relentless assault on the lodge. Elena was trapped here with a stranger who claimed to have answers about Marcus, about why she'd been brought to this place, about threats she didn't understand. She faced an impossible choice: trust Patterson and risk everything on the word of a man who'd been watching her life unfold from the shadows, or protect herself and Isabella by refusing to engage with whatever conspiracy had destroyed her world. The baby kicked again, urgent and demanding, reminding Elena that she wasn't just choosing for herself anymore. Elena pressed her hands against her belly, feeling Isabella's restless movements mirror her own internal turmoil. The baby's distress was becoming impossible to ignore. sharp kicks that felt more like panic than normal activity. As a physician, Elena knew the signs: maternal stress triggering fetal distress, a dangerous cycle that could lead to premature labor or worse. She needed to make a decision, and she needed to make it now. "Show me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Patterson's eyebrows lifted. "Show you what?" "Everything." Elena forced herself to meet his eyes, drawing on the same resolve that had carried her through medical school, through Marcus's death, through 6 months of rebuilding her life from scratch, the files, the evidence, whatever proof you have that Marcus is alive. "If I'm going to trust you, if I'm going to risk my daughter's life on your word, I need to see it all." She watched Patterson's face carefully, the way she observed patients when delivering devastating diagnoses. His relief was genuine, she realized. He'd been hoping she would ask, waiting for her to cross this line herself rather than being pushed over it. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Once you know the truth, there's no going back to the life you've been living. You can't unknow what I'm about to show you." The phrase echoed in Elena's mind. No going back. For 6 months, she'd been existing in a kind of suspended animation, planning a future built on Marcus's absence, while clinging to memories of their past together. She'd been safe in her grief, protected by the terrible certainty of death. What Patterson offered was chaos, the possibility that everything she'd mourned was a lie, that the father of her child was alive somewhere, while she'd been preparing to raise Isabella alone. But safety was an illusion. She'd learned that when Tom Bradley had knocked on her door with news of Marcus's accident, when the closed casket at his funeral had denied her even the chance to say goodbye. She'd learned it again tonight, when a routine drive to her sister's house had led her to this lodge filled with faces of the disappeared. Isabella kicked again, and Elena felt something shift inside her, not physical, but deeper. A recognition that her daughter deserved more than a mother who lived in the shadow of unanswered questions. If there were threats serious enough to fake Marcus's death, those same threats might follow Elena and Isabella forever, unless she understood what they were fighting. "Show me," she repeated, struggling to her feet with new determination. Patterson nodded slowly, then moved toward the corridor leading deeper into the lodge. Elena followed, each step feeling like a betrayal of the careful boundaries she'd constructed around her grief. The emergency lighting cast harsh shadows on the walls, and she caught glimpses of more posters, faces of people who'd vanished from their old lives, who'd crossed their own thresholds into whatever this place represented. They stopped before a heavy wooden door marked administration. Patterson produced a set of keys from his coat pocket, selecting one with the practiced ease of long familiarity. The lock turned with a well-oiled click, and the door swung open to reveal a room that shouldn't have existed in an abandoned lodge. Banks of filing cabinets lined the walls, their metal surfaces gleaming with recent maintenance. A computer sat on a large desk, its screen dark but clearly functional, the power cord snaked to an outlet that showed the telltale glow of active electricity. Maps covered one entire wall, marked with pins and colored strings that connected locations across the Colorado Rockies. But it was the corkboard beside the maps that made Elena's breath catch. Photographs. Dozens of them, arranged in careful rows. Some showed people she didn't recognize, men and women of various ages, all with the haunted expressions of those running from something terrible. But scattered among the strangers were faces that made Elena's world tilt sideways. Marcus, alive and clean-shaven, standing beside a cabin she didn't recognize. Tom Bradley, Marcus's supervisor, shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit. A photo of Elena herself, taken outside Denver General, her pregnant silhouette clearly visible as she walked toward her car. They'd been watching her. For how long? Since Marcus's supposed death? Since before? "How long have you known I was coming here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. 3 days, Patterson admitted. Marcus sent word that you'd changed your route to Denver, that the storm would force you to stop. He wanted to make sure you'd be safe. "Safe?" Elena laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "I'm standing in a room full of evidence that my dead husband is alive. that people have been photographing me without my knowledge, that my pregnancy might be part of some elaborate conspiracy. How is any of this safe? But even as she spoke, Elena felt the truth settling into her bones like winter cold. There was no safety anymore. There probably hadn't been since the day she'd married Marcus. The only choice was between ignorance and knowledge, between living as a target who didn't understand the danger and becoming someone who could fight back. Isabella's movement had calmed, as if the baby sensed her mother's shift from panic to resolve. Elena placed both hands on her belly, feeling the steady rhythm of her daughter's heartbeat against her palms. Whatever came next, they would face it together. She had crossed the threshold. There was no going back. Elena stared at the photographs until her vision blurred, trying to process the evidence of surveillance that stretched back months. The image of herself outside Denver General felt like a violation, an intimate moment stolen and catalogued by strangers. How many other photos existed? How many other moments of her grief had been documented and filed away? "I need to sit down," she said finally, the weight of Isabella making her legs unsteady. Patterson quickly cleared papers from a chair beside the desk, his movements careful and considerate. As Elena settled herself, she noticed details that had escaped her initial shock. The computer screen wasn't just dark, it was secured with multiple locks, passwords that would take serious effort to crack. The filing cabinets bore labels in what looked like code, numbers and letters that meant nothing to her, but suggested a sophisticated organization. This wasn't the work of a single person maintaining an abandoned lodge. This was a network. Who else knows? She asked. About Marcus, about this place, about me. Patterson hesitated, and Elena recognized the pause. She'd seen it countless times in the emergency room when families asked questions doctors weren't ready to answer. Bad news that required careful delivery. "There are others," he said finally. "People who help coordinate relocations, who provide new identities, who monitor threats. But Elena, you need to understand. We're not the enemy here. We're trying to keep people alive. People like Marcus." She studied the photo of her husband again, noting details that seemed impossibly normal. He looked healthy, alert, nothing like someone who'd suffered the traumatic fall that supposedly killed him. What was he investigating? What did he discover that was worth faking his death? Before Patterson could answer, a new sound cut through the storm's fury, the low rumble of an engine approaching the lodge. Elena's blood went cold as Patterson's expression shifted to sharp alertness. He moved quickly to a window, peering through heavy curtains at the driveway below. "Shit," he muttered, then caught himself. "Sorry, we have company." Elena struggled to her feet, her medical bag instinctively moving to her shoulder. In emergency situations, her training always kicked in. Prepare for the worst, hope for manageable complications. "I'm not sure. Could be one of ours, but the timing's wrong." Patterson was already moving, gathering papers from the desk with practiced efficiency. "We need to get you somewhere safe while I find out who this is." "No." The word came out sharper than Elena intended, but she was tired of being moved around like a chess piece by people who claimed to protect her while keeping her in the dark. "No more hiding. If someone's coming, I want to know who and why." Patterson's hands stilled on the papers. "Elena, you don't understand the stakes here. There are people who would kill for the information in this room, who have already killed to keep certain secrets buried. If the wrong person finds you here, then tell me who the wrong people are." Elena interrupted. "Give me names, faces, something I can recognize as danger, instead of asking me to trust blindly." The engine sound grew closer, and through the storm, Elena could make out the sweep of headlights across the lodge's main windows. Patterson cursed again, more colorfully this time, and Elena realized his careful composure was cracking under pressure. Good. She preferred honest fear to manufactured calm. "There's a coalition," he said quickly, stuffing files into a waterproof bag. "Government officials, private contractors, people who profit from making inconvenient witnesses disappear permanently. Marcus stumbled onto their operation while investigating poacher reports, except the poaching was cover for something much worse." Isabella kicked hard, responding to Elena's spike in adrenaline. The baby's movement reminded her of the stakes. This wasn't just about satisfying her curiosity anymore. Whatever Marcus had discovered, whatever had forced him to fake his death, she and Isabella were apparently connected to it now. Worse, how? She pressed, even as the sound of vehicle doors slamming echoed through the storm. Human trafficking, organ harvesting. People who disappear into these mountains aren't always running from domestic abuse or organized crime. Patterson's voice dropped to urgent whisper. Sometimes they're taken, and the same network that helps people disappear legitimately has been compromised by people who make them disappear permanently. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Marcus investigating poachers, discovering something that threatened powerful people, being forced to fake his death to survive. But that left one crucial question unanswered. Why had Elena been watched? Why had her pregnancy been documented? What value did she and Isabella have to people who trafficked in human lives? Heavy footsteps approached the lodge's front entrance, and Elena heard the creak of the main door opening. Whoever had arrived wasn't bothering with subtlety. They knew exactly where to find what they wanted. Patterson grabbed Elena's arm, his grip urgent but gentle. There's a back exit through the kitchen. I can get you to your car. No, Elena said again, surprising herself with her certainty. They're here for me, aren't they? Running will just delay the inevitable. She had crossed more than a threshold tonight. She had entered a world where her husband lived under an assumed name, where her pregnancy might be currency in someone else's deadly game, where the only path to safety led through the heart of danger itself. The footsteps were getting closer. Elena stood frozen in the administration room, listening to the measured footsteps approaching through the lodge's main hall. Each step seemed deliberate, unhurried, the gait of someone who knew exactly where they were going and what they expected to find. Beside her, Patterson's breathing had changed, becoming shallow and controlled in a way that reminded her of soldiers she'd treated in the emergency room. Men and women conditioned to manage fear through rigid discipline. "How many?" she whispered, her physician's training automatically assessing tactical information even as her mind reeled from everything she'd learned. Patterson held up 2 fingers, then pointed toward the ceiling. The footsteps had been joined by others, lighter, more cautious, moving through the upper floors. They were being surrounded. Elena's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where Isabella had gone unnaturally still, as if even the unborn child could sense the danger closing in around them. The baby's sudden stillness was more terrifying than her earlier agitated movements. Elena had seen this before during her obstetric rotations. Fetal stress response to maternal trauma. The body's way of conserving energy when survival became uncertain. "There's something else you need to know," Patterson said urgently, his voice barely audible over the storm. "The photo of Marcus that was posted 3 weeks ago, it wasn't accidental. Someone wanted you to see it, wanted to draw you here." The words hit Elena like physical blows. "You're saying this is a trap?" "I'm saying someone knows you well enough to predict how you'd react to seeing Marcus listed among the missing." Patterson's eyes were dark with something that looked like guilt. Someone who understands that you wouldn't be able to walk away from that poster without answers. Elena felt the room spinning around her, the careful walls she'd built around her grief and confusion crumbling entirely. If Patterson was right, then her pregnancy hormones hadn't made her irrational. Her instinctive need to investigate Marcus's poster had been anticipated, manipulated. Someone had counted on her curiosity, her inability to leave questions unanswered, her desperate love for a husband who might never have existed. "Who?" she demanded, but the question was interrupted by voices in the main hall, low, professional conversation that carried the unmistakable authority of people accustomed to getting their way through intimidation. Patterson moved to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. Elena watched his face transform, professional mask slipping to reveal genuine terror underneath. When he turned back to her, she saw a man who'd run out of options and was preparing for the worst possible outcome. "Elena, listen carefully," he said, pulling a cell phone from his jacket. "There's a number programmed under Echo 7. If something happens to me, if we get separated, call that number and say exactly this. The package needs immediate extraction. Nothing else. Can you remember that?" I'm not leaving you, Elena said automatically, the words surprising her. Despite everything, the surveillance photos, the lies about Marcus, the growing certainty that she'd been manipulated into coming here, Patterson represented her only connection to the truth. Abandoning him meant abandoning any hope of understanding what had happened to her life. You might not have a choice. Patterson pressed the phone into her hands, his fingers lingering over hers for a moment. Your husband made me promise something 6 months ago, the day we staged his death. He made me swear that if you were ever in danger, protecting you and Isabella would come before everything else. Before the operation, before other people's safety, before my own life. The admission hung between them, like a bridge Elena wasn't sure she was ready to cross. Marcus had planned for this moment, had anticipated that his investigation might eventually threaten her. The husband she'd mourned hadn't just abandoned her. He'd tried to protect her from consequences he'd known might follow. The voices in the main hall were getting closer, and Elena could make out individual words now. Sweep the upper floors first, someone was saying. If they're here, they'll have gone to ground in the administration area. They, plural, Patterson and Elena, anticipated and hunted together. How long? Elena asked. How long have they known I was coming? Since you changed your route 3 days ago. Maybe longer. Patterson's honesty felt like kindness and cruelty at the same time. Elena, there are things about your pregnancy, about Isabella's father, that go deeper than just Marcus's investigation. Questions I can't answer here, now, with them closing in. Isabella kicked suddenly, sharp and urgent, as if responding to the mention of her paternity. Elena gasped, the movement strong enough to make her double over briefly. When she straightened, Patterson was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, part concern, part calculation, part desperate hope. The footsteps had reached the corridor outside. In seconds, they would be at the administration door, and Elena would finally meet the people who'd been watching her life unfold from the shadows. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared to face whatever came next. The door exploded inward. Elena had prepared herself for the measured approach of professionals, for careful negotiations or demands delivered in controlled voices. Instead, 3 figures in tactical gear burst through the administration doorway like a natural disaster given human form. The leader, a woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes like winter storms, swept the room with military precision before her gaze settled on Elena with unmistakable satisfaction. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the woman said, her voice carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. You've been remarkably difficult to reach. Patterson stepped protectively in front of Elena, his hands raised but ready. Commander Walsh, this wasn't the arrangement. She's not part of... The arrangement changed when your operation was compromised. Walsh cut him off, her weapon never wavering from center mass. Step away from the doctor, Patterson. We have questions that require honest answers. Elena felt Isabella moving frantically inside her, the baby's distress spiking her own adrenaline to dangerous levels. Her medical training kicked in automatically, elevated heart rate in late pregnancy, stress hormones flooding the system, potential complications if this situation escalated further. She needed to maintain some control, for Isabella's sake if nothing else. What questions? Elena asked, stepping out from behind Patterson despite his sharp intake of breath. What could I possibly know that's worth this level of drama? Walsh's smile was predatory. Your husband was quite resourceful, Doctor. Before his unfortunate accident, he managed to steal something that belongs to us, something we've been very eager to recover. The casual reference to Marcus's death. Accident, as if the woman genuinely believed the official story, sent ice through Elena's veins. Either Walsh was playing games, or the network Patterson described was more fractured than she'd understood. Elena glanced at Patterson, whose face had gone carefully blank. Marcus is dead, Elena said carefully, testing the waters. He died 6 months ago in a fall while tracking poachers. Of course he did, Walsh agreed, but her eyes held dark amusement. Just as you're here tonight by pure coincidence, seeking shelter from an unexpected storm. just as you happened to see his missing person poster, and felt compelled to investigate. Remarkable how frequently coincidences cluster around certain people, don't you think? One of Walsh's companions, a younger man with surgical scars across his knuckles, moved to the filing cabinets, systematically pulling out drawers with practiced efficiency. The other began photographing documents on Patterson's desk with clinical precision. They weren't here for conversation, they were here for evidence. What did Marcus steal? Elena pressed, her curiosity overriding caution. What was worth killing for? Not what, Walsh corrected, holstering her weapon but maintaining her position between Elena and the door. Who? Your husband developed an unfortunate conscience about our client acquisition methods. He began documenting operations, collecting evidence, building cases against personnel who'd served faithfully for years. Elena's blood chilled. Client acquisition. The euphemism made her stomach turn even as her mind raced to process its implications. Marcus hadn't just discovered human trafficking. He'd been working inside the system, had access to names, locations, operational details that could destroy the entire network. But Marcus was careful, Walsh continued, circling Elena like a shark sensing blood in the water. He knew that stealing our files would make him a target, so he hid his insurance policy somewhere very clever, somewhere he knew we'd never think to look until it was too late. Patterson made a sharp sound of understanding, and Elena saw realization dawn across his features like sunrise. When Walsh's attention shifted to him, Elena felt the final piece click into place with horrible certainty. He didn't hide files, Elena whispered, her hands moving protectively to her belly. He hid them in someone. Walsh's smile widened. Your husband was brilliant, Doctor. Who would think to look for stolen intelligence files inside the memory banks of an unborn child? What mother would risk her baby's life by cooperating with authorities, knowing that extraction procedures might cause complications? The room spun around Elena as the full scope of Marcus's plan became clear. He hadn't just faked his death to protect her from his investigation. He'd used their daughter as a living safety deposit box, embedding stolen data in ways that made Isabella both invaluable and untouchable. Every kick, every movement Elena had attributed to normal fetal development had been cover for something infinitely more complex. That's impossible, she managed. Though even as she spoke, she remembered the unusual ultrasounds, the extra appointments Marcus had insisted on. The cutting-edge prenatal monitoring he'd claimed was routine for high-risk pregnancies. Medical technology has advanced remarkably in recent years, Walsh said pleasantly. Especially when government funding removes traditional ethical constraints. Your daughter is quite literally carrying the future of several very important operations in her developing brain tissue. Isabella's frantic movements suddenly made terrible sense. The baby wasn't just responding to Elena's stress. She was fighting against foreign intrusions, biological systems trying to protect themselves from unwanted data integration. Elena looked at Patterson, whose expression confirmed her worst fears. They hadn't just been hunting her as Marcus's widow, they'd been hunting her as a walking hard drive, carrying intelligence that could save or destroy lives depending on who controlled access. The ordeal was just beginning. The syringe appeared in Walsh's hand like a magic trick, its contents glowing amber under the lodge's harsh fluorescent lights. Elena's medical training identified the solution immediately, a paralytic agent, precise enough to immobilize without affecting fetal brain function. They had come prepared for extraction. The beautiful thing about your situation, Doctor, Walsh said, advancing with clinical precision, is that we don't need your cooperation. We just need you conscious enough to monitor your daughter's vital signs during the procedure. Elena backed against the filing cabinets, her hands instinctively shielding her belly. You can't extract data from fetal brain tissue without killing her. The neural pathways aren't fully developed. Any invasive procedure would cause massive hemorrhaging. Who said anything about extraction? Walsh's smile was winter cold. We're simply going to ensure Isabella develops in a more controlled environment, one where her unique gifts can be properly monitored and utilized. The words hit Elena like physical blows. They weren't planning to steal Marcus's hidden files. They were planning to steal her daughter, to take Isabella and raise her as government property. a living repository of stolen intelligence that could be accessed whenever necessary. Patterson lunged forward, desperation overriding tactical sense. "Elena, run!" A gunshot was impossibly loud in the enclosed space. Patterson crumpled against the desk, blood spreading across his shirt in a pattern Elena's medical training immediately recognized as fatal. She dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound even as she knew it was hopeless. "I'm sorry," Patterson whispered, his voice already fading. "I promised Marcus I'd keep you safe. I promised—" His eyes closed, and Elena felt the last hope of rescue die with him. She was alone, 8 months pregnant, trapped in a remote mountain lodge with people who viewed her unborn daughter as property to be harvested. "Such unnecessary drama," Walsh observed, stepping over Patterson's body with casual indifference. "Though I suppose loyalty deserves some recognition. Even misplaced loyalty. Now, Doctor, shall we discuss your immediate future?" Elena's phone, Patterson's phone with its programmed emergency number, lay scattered with his papers across the blood-stained desk. Even if she could reach it, even if she could dial the number he'd given her, help was hours away through the storm. Isabella would be gone long before rescue arrived. "The data Marcus hid," Elena said desperately, buying time while her mind raced through impossible options. "How do you know it's really there? How do you know he wasn't lying, manipulating you the same way he manipulated everyone else?" Walsh's expression flickered, the first crack in her professional composure. "Because we've been monitoring Isabella's development for months, Doctor. The unusual brain activity patterns, the accelerated neural growth, the electromagnetic signatures that don't match normal fetal development. Your daughter is quite literally becoming something unprecedented." The admission confirmed Elena's worst fears while revealing something else. They had been watching Isabella since before Marcus's supposed death. The surveillance photos in Patterson's files represented months of observation, tracking not just Elena's movements, but her pregnancy's progression. Every doctor's visit, every ultrasound, every moment of prenatal care had been documented by people planning to steal her child. "Marcus knew," Elena whispered, understanding flooding through her like poison. "He knew you were watching us. That's why he faked his death. Not to protect me from his investigation, but to protect Isabella from you." But Marcus's plan had failed. Instead of hiding Isabella's existence, his staged death had only delayed the inevitable. Elena could see the calculation in Walsh's eyes, 6 months of allowing the pregnancy to progress naturally, waiting for optimal brain development before claiming their prize. Isabella's movements had stopped entirely now, the baby's stillness more terrifying than any pain Elena had ever experienced. Fetal stress response to extreme maternal trauma could cause premature labor, placental abruption, a dozen complications that would kill them both. Elena was a doctor. She knew the statistics. She also knew that in her current situation, medical complications might be a mercy rather than a tragedy. "The storm won't last forever," Walsh continued conversationally, as if discussing weather rather than kidnapping. "By morning, we'll have you transferred to a facility with proper prenatal care. The best doctors, the finest equipment, everything necessary to ensure Isabella's safe delivery and optimal development." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of absolute defeat settle over her like a shroud. Marcus's files, whatever intelligence he'd hidden inside their daughter, were lost. Patterson was dead, his promised rescue line severed. The baby she'd carried and loved and mourned Marcus with had become a weapon in a war she didn't understand. When she opened her eyes again, Walsh was holding the syringe inches from her throat. "Time to go, Doctor. Your daughter's future is waiting." The needle pricked Elena's skin, and in that crystalline moment between consciousness and oblivion, everything clicked into place with devastating clarity. The ultrasound images flashed through her mind. Not the grainy standard pictures she'd assumed were normal, but high-resolution scans showing neural pathways too complex for natural development. Marcus's insistence on specific doctors, specific facilities, his unusual knowledge of cutting-edge prenatal technology. The way he'd touched her belly in those final weeks, whispering to Isabella with an intensity that had seemed like love, but now revealed itself as something else entirely. Apology. "Wait!" Elena gasped, her hand shooting up to grip Walsh's wrist with surprising strength. "You don't understand what Marcus really did." Walsh paused, the syringe hovering millimeters from Elena's throat. "Enlighten me, Doctor." Elena's mind raced through months of memories. Medical training overlaying personal experience to reveal patterns she'd been too grief-stricken to recognize. The genetic counseling sessions Marcus had arranged. The experimental vitamin supplements he'd brought home. The way Isabella's movements had always synchronized with specific electromagnetic frequencies in their apartment. He didn't just hide files in her brain, Elena whispered, the horrifying truth crystallizing. He made her into a living encryption key. The data isn't just stored in her neural pathways, it's encoded into her genetic structure itself. Walsh's expression shifted from confidence to sharp attention. "Explain." CRISPR gene editing, combined with targeted electromagnetic exposure during neural development. Elena continued, her voice growing stronger as the pieces fell together. "Marcus didn't steal your files and hide them. He copied them, then embedded the intelligence directly into Isabella's DNA, using techniques that wouldn't show up on standard prenatal testing." She saw Walsh's tactical companion exchange a look of alarm with his partner. This wasn't what they'd been told. This wasn't what they'd prepared for. "That's impossible," Walsh said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. "The technology doesn't exist for that level of genetic data storage." "It does if you have access to classified military research," Elena shot back. Marcus was a park ranger, but he was also former special forces. He had clearance levels you never knew about, connections to programs that make your human trafficking network look like amateur hour. Isabella suddenly kicked, hard, urgent, as if responding to Elena's words. The movement sent a shock of recognition through Elena's system because the pattern wasn't random, it was rhythmic, coded. Her daughter had been trying to communicate for months, and Elena had been too overwhelmed to listen. "My God," Elena breathed, her hands pressing against her belly as another sequence of kicks followed. "She's conscious. The enhanced neural development. It's not just data storage. Marcus made her sentient before birth." Walsh stepped back, the syringe lowering slightly. For the first time since bursting through the door, she looked uncertain. "That's medically impossible. So was embedding stolen intelligence in fetal brain tissue, according to you," Elena countered. "But here we are." Another pattern of kicks, and this time Elena recognized it. Morse code. Isabella was tapping out Morse code from inside the womb, trying to warn her mother about something Elena couldn't yet understand. "The electromagnetic signatures you've been monitoring," Elena continued, pieces falling together like a terrible puzzle. "They're not just from the hidden data. Isabella's been broadcasting. Every kick, every movement. She's been sending out the intelligence files, transmitting them to receivers Marcus planted throughout these mountains." Walsh's face went white. "Broadcasting to whom?" "Everyone," Elena realized, horror and admiration mixing in her voice. "Marcus didn't just steal your client lists and operational details. He turned our daughter into a living dead man's switch. Every day Isabella develops further, her brain transmits more classified information to journalists, federal agents, international human rights organizations. He's been exposing your entire network, one neural impulse at a time." The tactical team members were backing toward the door now, speaking rapidly into concealed microphones. Whatever Elena had revealed, it was significant enough to change their entire operational parameters. "That's why you really need her alive," Elena continued, understanding flooding through her. "Not just to access Marcus's stolen files, but to stop the transmission. Isabella isn't just carrying your secrets. She's actively broadcasting them to destroy you." Isabella's kicks intensified, and Elena could swear she felt something like approval in the rhythm. Her unborn daughter wasn't just a victim in Marcus's plan. She was a willing participant, a conscious agent working to bring down the network that had killed her father and threatened her mother. Walsh raised the syringe again, but her hand was shaking now. Then we extract her immediately. Stop the transmission before... Before what? Elena smiled grimly. Before the world learns about your organ trafficking operation? Too late. Isabella's been broadcasting for months. By now, Marcus's insurance policy has reached people who can't be bought, silenced, or eliminated. The lodge lights flickered, and Elena heard something that made her heart soar. Helicopter rotors cutting through the storm, growing closer. Echo 7 had been listening all along. The helicopter rotors grew thunderous overhead, their downdraft rattling the lodge windows like gunfire. Elena pressed herself against the filing cabinet, watching Walsh's team scramble for defensive positions with the desperate efficiency of cornered predators. But something in their movements told her this wasn't the rescue she'd hoped for. Echo 7, this is ground control, Walsh barked into her radio, her composure cracking for the first time. You were ordered to maintain perimeter until extraction was complete. The response crackled through static. Ground control. We have multiple federal agencies converging on your position. FBI, ATF, and what appears to be military intelligence. Recommend immediate abort and exfiltration. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Isabella's broadcasts had worked. Marcus's dead man's switch had finally triggered the response he'd designed. But the tactical team wasn't retreating. Instead, they were setting up equipment Elena recognized from her emergency room experience. Portable surgical tools, fetal monitoring devices, anesthesia supplies. They're going to perform an emergency C-section, she realized aloud, medical horror overriding her relief at the approaching authorities. Right here, right now. Walsh's smile returned, colder than the mountain storm. Your daughter's transmissions end today, Doctor, with or without your cooperation. The surgical lights blazed to life, transforming Patterson's office into a makeshift operating theater. Elena watched in growing desperation as sterile drapes appeared, monitoring equipment hummed to life, and instruments that could save or kill depending on their wielder's intentions gleamed under harsh fluorescence. Isabella's kicks grew frantic, the Morse code patterns becoming urgent, overlapping, desperate. Elena closed her eyes and focused on the rhythm, her medical training helping her decode the increasingly complex signals. What she translated made her blood freeze. Help coming. Father's plan. Trust Patterson. Patterson's dead, Elena whispered to her belly, tears streaming down her face. The kicks stopped abruptly, then resumed in a different pattern, slower, more deliberate. Not Patterson. Echo 7. Father's team. Understanding hit Elena like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just been a park ranger with Special Forces background. He'd been deep undercover, building a case against the trafficking network from the inside. Echo 7 wasn't Walsh's team. They were Marcus's people, finally moving to complete the mission he'd died for. The helicopter, Elena said, loud enough for Walsh to hear. They're not your people anymore, are they? Walsh spun toward her, the syringe raised like a weapon. What are you talking about? Marcus flipped them, Elena continued, strength flooding back into her voice as Isabella's communications clarified the scope of her father's plan. Months of evidence, documented atrocities, proof of government complicity in human trafficking. How many of your own people do you think stayed loyal when they learned the truth? The radio crackled again. Ground control. This is Echo 7 actual. Dr. Vasquez, if you can hear this, we need you to get to the main fireplace. Marcus left something for you there. Walsh's remaining team member, the one with scarred knuckles, moved toward Elena with surgical restraints, but she was already pushing off from the filing cabinet, adrenaline and desperation giving her pregnant body surprising mobility. The main hall was only 20 feet away, but it might as well have been 20 miles. Stop her, Walsh commanded. But gunfire erupted from outside the lodge as federal agents encountered whatever perimeter defenses remained. The tactical team found themselves fighting a two-front battle, their attention divided between containing Elena and surviving the assault. Elena stumbled into the main hall, her hands scanning the stone fireplace frantically as Isabella's kicks guided her movements. There, Behind the andirons, a loose stone that shifted when pressed. Her fingers found the hidden compartment Marcus had prepared, withdrawing a device she didn't recognize and a letter written in his familiar handwriting. Elena, if you're reading this, Isabella's transmissions have worked, and help is coming. The device will amplify her broadcasts and upload everything we've gathered to secure servers worldwide. Whatever happens next, our daughter has already won. Trust Echo 7. Trust yourself. The man you loved was real, even if everything else was a lie. M. The device activated at her touch, its display showing transmission bars reaching maximum strength. Isabella's kicks became rhythmic, purposeful, as if her consciousness was finally free to complete her father's work without the biological constraints that had limited her communication. Dr. Vasquez. The voice came from the lodge entrance as black-clad figures poured through the doorway. Not Walsh's people, but federal agents with rescue operation patches Elena recognized from news coverage of major trafficking busts. Behind them came a woman in military fatigues, her face scarred but kind, her eyes holding recognition that made Elena's breath catch. "I'm Major Sarah Chen, Echo 7 Actual," the woman said, kneeling beside Elena as contractions, real ones this time, triggered by stress and relief, began rippling through her abdomen. "Marcus saved my daughter from these people 3 years ago. Now let us save his." Isabella's final transmission pulsed through the device, uploading 6 months of accumulated intelligence to servers across the globe. Elena felt her daughter's consciousness settle into peaceful patterns as the mission Marcus had embedded in her genetic structure completed itself. The network was finished. Isabella was safe, and somewhere in the growing warmth spreading through Elena's chest, she felt Marcus's presence like a benediction. The pregnant widow had stepped into the lodge seeking shelter. What she found was the strength to finish what love had started, the road back. Elena's contractions intensified as Major Chen's medic team rushed to stabilize her, their practiced efficiency a stark contrast to Walsh's surgical brutality. Through the chaos of federal agents securing the lodge, Elena gripped the transmission device like a lifeline, watching its final data streams pulse into the darkness beyond the mountains. Isabella's transmissions are complete. She gasped between contractions, her medical training recognizing the signs of stress-induced labor. But Walsh and her surgical team, they're still in Patterson's office. Major Chen's expression hardened. Not anymore. She gestured toward the lodge's rear exit, where tactical officers were escorting zip-tied figures through the snow. "We've been tracking their operation for 18 months. Tonight was the culmination of everything Marcus died to accomplish." The words hit Elena with unexpected force. For 6 months, she'd mourned a man she thought had abandoned her, died accidentally while chasing poachers. Learning he'd been deep undercover, protecting her and Isabella while building a case against traffickers, should have brought comfort. Instead, it amplified a grief she'd barely begun to process. "He never told me," she whispered, watching snow swirl through the open doorway. 6 months of marriage, and he never told me who he really was. "Because telling you would have killed you both," Chen replied, her scarred hand surprisingly gentle as she helped Elena into a more comfortable position. Marcus's cover was perfect precisely because it was real. He loved you completely, Elena. That love just served a larger purpose. Another contraction gripped her, and Elena felt Isabella respond with purposeful movements. Not the desperate Morse code of before, but something calmer, acknowledging her daughter's consciousness, enhanced by Marcus's genetic modifications, seemed to understand that the immediate danger had passed. But understanding brought new horrors. Elena's medical mind catalogued the implications of what had been done to Isabella. Experimental gene therapy, electromagnetic neural modification, consciousness enhancement that had turned her unborn child into a living weapon. The ethics violations alone were staggering. "What Marcus did to her," Elena said, her voice breaking. "The genetic manipulation, the neural enhancement, even for a good cause, it's monstrous. He experimented on our daughter." He gave her the tools to save herself, Chen corrected firmly, and to save hundreds of other children. The intelligence Isabella broadcast tonight will shut down trafficking networks across 3 continents. Your daughter isn't a victim, Elena. She's a hero. Through the lodge windows, Elena could see emergency vehicles arriving despite the storm. Ambulances, additional federal response teams, media vans with satellite dishes already deploying. The story would break within hours, a network of government-connected human traffickers brought down by a pregnant widow and her genetically enhanced unborn daughter. The world would want answers Elena wasn't sure she could provide. The media coverage will be intense, Chen continued, reading her thoughts. Federal witness protection can relocate you and Isabella after she's born. New identities, clean backgrounds, a chance to live normally. Normally. Elena almost laughed at the impossibility. My daughter's brain contains 6 months of classified intelligence and enhanced neural capabilities. She was tapping Morse code from inside the womb. What exactly about our situation qualifies as normal? The transmission device in her hands finally went dark, its mission complete. Elena felt Isabella settle into quieter patterns, the frenetic energy that had driven months of broadcasting finally dissipating. But questions remained about the long-term effects of Marcus's modifications, about Isabella's future development, about what kind of life awaited a child born into such extraordinary circumstances. Patterson left files, Elena said suddenly, remembering the scattered intelligence photos. Documentation about other children, other families targeted by the network. If Isabella's broadcasts exposed the trafficking operation, those families deserve to know their children might still be alive. Chen nodded grimly. Recovery operations are already beginning. But Elena, you need to understand, completing Marcus's mission tonight was just the beginning. There will be trials, congressional hearings, international investigations. You and Isabella will be central to prosecuting crimes that reach the highest levels of government. The weight of that responsibility settled over Elena like a physical burden. She'd sought refuge from a storm, and instead found herself at the center of a conspiracy that would reshape how the world understood human trafficking, genetic enhancement, and the lengths people would go to protect their children. Another contraction peaked, and Elena realized with clinical detachment that her labor was progressing despite the stress, or perhaps because of it. Isabella would be born into a world where her father's sacrifice had meaning, where the network that killed him was finally exposed. I won't run, Elena said, her decision crystallizing with the same clarity that had driven her investigation of the lodge. No witness protection, no new identities. Isabella deserves to know who her father really was, what he died for. And those other families, they deserve justice. Chen smiled, the expression transforming her scarred features. Marcus said you'd choose to fight. He was counting on it. Outside, the storm was finally breaking, revealing stars that had been hidden for days. Elena felt the first stirrings of something beyond grief and horror, a fierce determination to see Marcus's work completed, whatever the personal cost. The road back to normal was impossible, but the road forward, toward justice and truth, stretched clear before them. Elena's fierce determination crystallized into ice-cold focus as another contraction gripped her. The stars emerging through the breaking storm seemed to mock the gravity of what lay ahead. She'd committed to fighting, to seeing Marcus's work completed, but the true scope of that decision was only now becoming clear. There's something else, Major Chen said, her expression darkening as she glanced toward the federal agents securing the lodge. The intelligence Isabella broadcast, it didn't just expose trafficking networks. It revealed government contracts, congressional appropriations, military funding streams. The people behind this operation aren't just criminals, Elena. They're senators, cabinet members, defense contractors with security clearances higher than mine. The transmission device in Elena's hands felt suddenly heavier. Isabella's enhanced consciousness had been broadcasting evidence of treason, not just trafficking. The scope of Marcus's investigation and their daughter's unwitting participation reached levels that could topple governments. They'll try to discredit everything, Elena realized. her medical training helping her think through the implications with clinical precision. Claimed that genetic modifications make Isabella's transmissions unreliable, that Marcus was a rogue agent, that the evidence is tainted. Which is why we need more than broadcasts, Chen replied. We need living proof that Isabella's consciousness is real, that her transmissions were accurate, that Marcus's modifications created something unprecedented in human development. Another contraction peaked, and Elena felt Isabella respond with complex movement patterns, not random kicks, but purposeful demonstrations of cognitive ability. Her daughter understood the conversation, understood what was being asked of her. The realization should have been miraculous. Instead, it filled Elena with a terror that transcended physical pain. "You want me to put my newborn daughter on trial?" Elena whispered. "Subject her to cognitive testing, brain scans, neurological examination by people who see her as a scientific curiosity instead of a child. I want you to prove that everything Marcus died for was real," Chen countered. "Because if we can't substantiate Isabella's capabilities, if we can't demonstrate that her transmissions were conscious and deliberate, then every piece of evidence she broadcast becomes circumstantial. The network survives, the trafficking continues, and Marcus's sacrifice means nothing." The lodge around them had transformed into a crime scene. Federal agents photographing the missing person posters that had started Elena's investigation. She could see them bagging Marcus's poster, the one dated 3 weeks ago that had revealed his true fate. Evidence in what would become the most complex prosecution in modern history. But evidence required witnesses, and Isabella wasn't just a witness, she was the key to everything. "The genetic modifications Marcus made," Elena said, her voice steady despite the contractions intensifying around Isabella's restless movements. "They're irreversible, aren't they? Whatever he did to enhance her neural development, she'll carry those changes her entire life." Chen nodded grimly. "Enhanced cognitive ability, electromagnetic sensitivity, accelerated neural pathway development. Isabella will never be a normal child, Elena, but she'll be something the world has never seen, living proof that human consciousness can be deliberately enhanced, that genetic modification can create capabilities we've only imagined." Elena closed her eyes, feeling Isabella's movements settle into what she now recognized as communication patterns. Her daughter was listening, processing, understanding discussions about her future with an intelligence that should have been impossible for any fetus. Marcus's modifications hadn't just enhanced Isabella's brain. They'd created a new form of human consciousness entirely. "The testing won't stop with proving her capabilities," Elena said, opening her eyes to meet Chen's scarred gaze. "Once the world knows what Isabella represents, every government, every corporation, every military organization will want to study her. Replicate what Marcus did. Create more enhanced children. Or," Chen replied carefully, "we establish legal precedent that protects genetically enhanced individuals from exploitation. Isabella could be the first, but she doesn't have to be alone." Marcus's research included safeguards, ethical guidelines, protocols for consensual enhancement. His vision wasn't about creating weapons. It was about giving human consciousness the tools to evolve. The storm outside was clearing rapidly now, revealing a landscape transformed by snow and starlight. Elena could see helicopter landing lights in the distance, medical evacuation preparing for her transport to a hospital capable of handling whatever complications Isabella's birth might present. But she knew there would be no normal delivery, no quiet recovery, no peaceful introduction to motherhood. Isabella kicked once deliberately, and Elena felt the pattern like Morse code against her palm ready. "She understands," Elena breathed, wonder and horror mixing in her voice. "She knows what's coming, what will be asked of her, and she's ready to do it." Chen leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Elena could hear. Marcus's final message included instructions, protocols for protecting Isabella while proving her capabilities. He knew this moment would come. Everything that happens next, he planned for. Elena felt the last of her resistance crumble. Marcus had orchestrated not just the destruction of the trafficking network, but Isabella's emergence as something unprecedented in human development. Their daughter wasn't just inheriting her father's mission, she was designed to complete it. The final test wasn't about survival anymore. It was about transformation. Of Elena into the mother of humanity's future, and Isabella into living proof that evolution could be chosen, directed, and used to protect the innocent. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead, as Elena felt Isabella's urgent pattern shift from ready to something far more complex, a warning. Chen was already moving, her scarred hand reaching for the sidearm at her hip, when the lodge's emergency lighting cut out entirely. Backup power's been severed, Chen barked into her radio. All units, we have hostile activity. The transmission died as electromagnetic interference flooded the building. Elena's body convulsed as Isabella's enhanced neural activity spiked, her daughter's consciousness suddenly broadcasting alarm signals that made Elena's teeth ache. Through the pain, she understood. The network's true leadership hadn't been captured. They were here. Dr. Vasquez. The voice emerged from the darkness beyond the main hall, cultured and calm despite the chaos. I believe we have unfinished business. Elena recognized the speaker even before emergency lighting flickered back to life, revealing Senator Patricia Hawthorne stepping through the lodge's rear entrance. Behind her moved figures Elena had hoped never to see again, not Walsh's surgical team, but something worse. Men and women in expensive clothing carrying military-grade weapons, their faces holding the cold professionalism of people who killed for policy rather than passion. The Senate Oversight Committee has been monitoring tonight's operation, Hawthorne continued, her silver hair gleaming under the dim lights. Imagine our concern when classified intelligence began broadcasting from an unborn child. Such capabilities cannot be allowed to exist outside proper government oversight. Chen raised her weapon, but red laser dots immediately appeared on her chest, her forehead, her gun hand. Elena counted at least 6 shooters positioned throughout the lodge's shadows, a coordinated assault that had somehow bypassed federal security. Your daughter's transmissions tonight weren't just evidence gathering, Hawthorne said, moving closer with the confidence of someone who held absolute authority. They were a demonstration, proof that Marcus's genetic modifications succeeded beyond our wildest projections. Isabella represents the future of human intelligence gathering, a living surveillance system that could revolutionize national security. Elena felt Isabella's movements become frantic, desperate, as her enhanced consciousness grasped the implications. The trafficking network had been a front, a testing ground for genetic enhancement research funded by congressional black budgets. Marcus hadn't died trying to expose criminals. He'd died trying to prevent the militarization of human evolution. The missing children, Elena breathed, horror crushing her chest more severely than any contraction. They weren't being trafficked for organs. They were test subjects. Failed experiments, Hawthorne corrected with clinical detachment. Marcus's work with Isabella was the first complete success. Enhanced neural development, electromagnetic consciousness, accelerated cognitive evolution. She's not just your daughter, Dr. Vasquez. She's a prototype for the next generation of American intelligence assets. The truth hit Elena like physical violence. The network, the trafficking, the surgical procedures, all of it had been researched toward creating children like Isabella, enhanced minds that could gather intelligence before birth, process classified information at superhuman speeds, serve as living weapons in conflicts that traditional warfare couldn't touch. You're insane, Chen snarled, her weapon still trained on Hawthorne despite the targeting lasers. These are children, not assets. Human beings with rights, with dignity. Children who could prevent the next 9/11, stop nuclear terrorism, save millions of lives through capabilities ordinary humans cannot possess, Hawthorne interrupted. Marcus understood the potential. His modifications to Isabella prove that human consciousness can be weaponized for the greater good. Elena's labor intensified as Isabella's panic transmitted through neural pathways that shouldn't have existed. Her daughter understood every word, comprehended the threat with an intelligence that transcended biological development. Marcus's enhancements had created not just advanced cognition, but prescient awareness of what that intelligence could become in the wrong hands. "Marcus died to prevent this," Elena said, her voice steady despite the contractions tearing through her body. "He didn't enhance Isabella to serve government interests. He gave her the tools to protect herself from people like you." Hawthorne smiled with genuine warmth that made Elena's blood freeze. "Marcus died because he refused to share his research. We have everything we need from Isabella's transmissions tonight: genetic sequences, neural pathway modifications, electromagnetic frequency mappings. Your daughter has already served her country admirably." The transmission device in Elena's hand suddenly flared to life, its display showing new activity. Isabella wasn't just broadcasting anymore, she was receiving, downloading something that made the device's circuits spark and smoke. "However," Hawthorne continued, "raising an enhanced child requires specialized care, controlled environments, educational protocols designed to maximize her capabilities. The state can provide resources no private citizen could match." Elena felt Isabella's final message pulse through her consciousness. Like lightning, fight. Her daughter hadn't been preparing to cooperate with government oversight. She'd been preparing for war against the people who would turn enhanced children into weapons. And Marcus's final protocol wasn't about protection. It was about ensuring Isabella could defend herself against the full power of a government that saw her as property. The confrontation Elena had dreaded was here, not just for Isabella's freedom, but for the future of human enhancement itself. The transmission device exploded in Elena's hands, circuits frying as Isabella's final download completed. The pain seared through Elena's palms, but she understood. Her daughter had just absorbed something that made Hawthorne's confident smile falter. "What did she take?" Hawthorne demanded, stepping closer as the device's remains sparked against the lodge floor. Elena felt Isabella's consciousness expand beyond anything she'd experienced before, not just enhanced neural activity, but something that transcended human cognitive limitations entirely. Marcus's final protocol hadn't been defensive, it had been evolutionary. "She took everything," Elena whispered, realization flooding through her as another contraction peaked. Every classified file, every congressional appropriation, every identity of everyone involved in creating enhanced children. Marcus didn't just modify her brain, he gave her the ability to download and process the entire federal intelligence database. The laser dots targeting Chen began to waver as electronic devices throughout the lodge started failing. Emergency lighting flickered, radio communications died, and Elena heard Hawthorne's team reporting equipment malfunctions through increasingly desperate whispers. But Elena understood the true cost now. Isabella wasn't just accessing government intelligence, she was absorbing it permanently. Every classified document, every state secret, every piece of information needed to expose the Enhanced Children program was burning itself into her daughter's neural pathways. Isabella would be born carrying knowledge that could topple governments, but that knowledge would be part of her consciousness forever. "You don't understand," Hawthorne said, her composure cracking as she realized the scope of what Isabella had accessed. "That information is classified at levels that require—" "Require what?" Elena interrupted, her voice hardening as Isabella's movements shifted into purposeful preparation for birth. "Require that my daughter spent her entire life in federal custody? That she never know freedom because her brain contains state secrets?" Elena felt the devastating choice crystallizing before her. Isabella's download had given them the evidence needed to destroy the Enhanced Children program completely, but possessing that evidence made Isabella herself a national security threat. Her daughter would be born free from military experimentation, but enslaved by the knowledge needed to ensure that freedom. "There's another way," Chen said suddenly, her weapon still trained on Hawthorne despite the electronic chaos surrounding them. Marcus included fail-safes in his protocols. "Elena, Isabella can broadcast everything she downloaded, but the transmission will burn out her enhanced neural pathways," Elena finished, understanding flooding through her with crystal clarity. "She can save other children by exposing the program, but she'll lose the cognitive abilities that make her special. She'll become normal." The choice Marcus had left them was brutal in its simplicity. Isabella could use her enhanced consciousness to broadcast evidence that would end the government's Enhanced Children program forever, saving countless future victims. But the transmission would overload the neural modifications that gave her superhuman intelligence, leaving her with ordinary human cognitive abilities, enhanced consciousness that could change the world, or a normal daughter who could live freely. Elena couldn't have both. Hawthorne seemed to sense the internal struggle. Even ordinary children can be useful to their country, Dr. Vasquez. Isabella's genetic markers would still make her valuable for breeding programs. Elena's decision crystallized with the force of a contraction that brought her to her knees. She would not allow Isabella to be reduced to genetic material, would not permit her daughter's freedom to be compromised by abilities that made her a target. "Do it," Elena whispered, her hands finding the backup transmission device Chen pressed into her palms. "Broadcast everything. Let every newspaper, every foreign government, every citizen know what was done to create enhanced children. End this program forever." She felt Isabella respond with complex movement patterns that seemed almost like gratitude. Her daughter understood the sacrifice, giving up extraordinary intelligence to ensure that other children would never face the same exploitation. Elena activated the transmission as her labor reached its final stage. Through the lodge's windows, she could see satellite dishes and cell towers throughout the valley beginning to glow with electromagnetic activity. Isabella was broadcasting terabytes of classified information to every connected device within range, a data dump that would expose the Enhanced Children program to global scrutiny. But with each transmission burst, Elena felt Isabella's consciousness diminishing. The superhuman intelligence that had sustained complex communication from the womb was burning itself out like an overloaded circuit. Her daughter was choosing to become ordinary to save others from becoming weapons. Hawthorne and her team fled as their own communication devices began broadcasting the classified information they'd tried to protect. The electromagnetic interference made their weapons unreliable, their coordination impossible. As the transmission completed, Elena felt Isabella settle into movement patterns that were wonderfully, reassuringly normal. Random kicks and turns of an ordinary baby preparing to be born. The enhanced consciousness was gone, sacrificed to ensure Isabella would never be seen as government property. The cost of winning was devastating and perfect. Isabella would live freely precisely because she'd given up the abilities that made her special. Marcus's final gift wasn't enhancement, it was the chance to choose humanity over power. Elena's daughter would be born ordinary, and that ordinariness would be her greatest protection. The electromagnetic storm that had consumed the valley gradually subsided, leaving behind an eerie silence that felt both peaceful and hollow. Elena lay against the lodge's wooden floor, her breathing slowly returning to normal as the final contractions of labor approached. The transmission device in her hands had gone completely dark, its circuits burned beyond repair by Isabella's massive data broadcast. Chen knelt beside her, checking Elena's pulse while keeping one eye on the lodge's entrances. "Federal medical teams are 2 minutes out," she said quietly. "The interference is clearing, and we've got clean communication with the helicopter." Elena nodded, but her attention remained focused inward, on the profound change she felt in Isabella's presence. The complex movement patterns that had characterized her daughter's enhanced consciousness were gone, replaced by the simple, instinctive movements of a baby preparing for birth. No more electromagnetic sensitivity, no more impossible cognitive awareness. Isabella had become what Elena had always hoped she could be, an ordinary child with an extraordinary chance at freedom. The data transmission reached major news networks before Hawthorne's team could stop it, Chen continued, her scarred face showing the first smile Elena had seen from her. Congressional servers, foreign intelligence agencies, civilian media outlets, everything Isabella downloaded is now public record. The Enhanced Children program is finished. Through the lodge's shattered windows, Elena could see vehicles fleeing down the mountain roads in the distance. Hawthorne's operatives had abandoned their positions once their own devices began broadcasting the classified information they'd killed to protect. The senator herself had vanished into the night, though Elena knew it would only be temporary refuge. The evidence Isabella had released would make prosecution inevitable. "How many children?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In the files Isabella accessed, how many children were part of their experiments? Chen's expression darkened. 47 confirmed cases over the past decade. Most didn't survive the neural modification procedures. The ones who did, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Some are still in government facilities. Others were adopted into families that didn't know about their enhancements. Isabella's broadcast included location data for all of them. Elena felt tears burning her eyes, not from physical pain, but from the magnitude of what Isabella had sacrificed herself to reveal. Dozens of children whose extraordinary abilities had made them prisoners of their own genetics, trapped in research programs that treated them as assets rather than human beings. Isabella's choice to burn out her own enhancements had saved them all from that fate. Marcus knew, Elena said, understanding flooding through her with crystalline clarity. He designed Isabella's modifications specifically for this moment. The download capability, the broadcast protocols, even the neural burnout. It was all planned. He created her enhanced consciousness as a weapon against the people who would exploit enhanced consciousness. A contraction stronger than any before it seized Elena's body, and she realized that Isabella's birth was no longer a distant inevitability. Her daughter was coming now, in this remote lodge surrounded by the wreckage of a conspiracy that had claimed so many lives. The timing felt symbolic, Isabella entering the world precisely as her sacrifice freed other children from the fate she'd escaped. "The medical teams will have questions," Chen warned, helping Elena into a more comfortable position as they waited for the evacuation helicopter to arrive. Isabella's abilities were unprecedented. Even ordinary children of genetically modified parents require specialized monitoring. Elena shook her head firmly. Isabella is ordinary now. Whatever made her special is gone, burned away by her own choice to save others. The medical teams will find a normal, healthy baby girl whose only unusual characteristic is being born during a blizzard in an abandoned lodge. As if responding to her mother's words, Isabella delivered a series of perfectly normal kicks, random, instinctive movements without the purposeful intelligence that had characterized her enhanced state. Elena felt a complex mixture of loss and relief. She would never again experience the strange wonder of communicating with her unborn daughter, never witness the superhuman intelligence that had developed in her womb. But she also knew that Isabella would grow up free from the burden of being seen as government property, able to make choices about her own life without the constant threat of federal oversight. The helicopter's rotors grew louder as it approached the lodge's clearing, medical personnel preparing to transport Elena to a hospital capable of handling any complications from Isabella's birth. But Elena felt certain there would be no complications now. Isabella had chosen humanity over enhancement, normalcy over power, freedom over the extraordinary abilities that would have made freedom impossible. Marcus's final gift to their daughter hadn't been superhuman consciousness. It had been the wisdom to know when that consciousness should be sacrificed for something more valuable. Isabella would be born ordinary, and that ordinariness would be the foundation of a life lived entirely on her own terms. The immediate crisis was over, but Elena understood that the aftermath would reshape everything she'd believed about genetics, consciousness, and the price of protecting the people we love most. The return. 3 weeks later, Elena sat in her sister Carmen's living room in Denver, watching snow fall outside windows that no longer triggered memories of electromagnetic storms or government conspiracies. Isabella slept peacefully in her arms, a perfectly ordinary baby whose only remarkable feature was how unremarkable she'd become. No strange movements, no impossible awareness, no consciousness that transcended biological development. Just the soft breathing and random dreams of a newborn who would never know the burden of being extraordinary. The world beyond those windows had changed dramatically since Isabella's broadcast. Congressional hearings dominated the news cycles, as senators and intelligence officials testified about enhanced children programs that violated every ethical boundary imaginable. Hawthorne had been arrested trying to cross into Canada, her confident smile replaced by the hollow stare of someone whose life's work had crumbled in a single night. The 47 surviving enhanced children were being relocated to families chosen for their commitment to normal childhoods, rather than their security clearances. But Elena found herself strangely disconnected from the media circus she'd helped create. The woman who'd driven into the Colorado mountains seeking answers about Marcus's death seemed like a different person entirely, that Elena had believed in the possibility of closure, had imagined that truth would restore the sense of safety she'd lost when her husband died. This Elena understood that some losses could never be restored, only transformed into something bearable. "You're different," Carmen observed, settling onto the couch beside her with 2 cups of tea. "Not just tired from new motherhood, actually different. Like you're carrying yourself differently." Elena accepted the tea gratefully, careful not to disturb Isabella's sleep. "I learned things about Marcus that I can never unknown, about the world Isabella will grow up in, about how thin the line is between protection and control." She paused, studying her daughter's face for any trace of the consciousness that had once communicated, through electromagnetic pulses. Different seems appropriate. The official story was simpler than the truth. Dr. Elena Vasquez had uncovered evidence of illegal medical experiments while investigating her late husband's research, leading to the exposure of a rogue government program. The media portrayed her as a whistleblower who'd risked everything to protect children from exploitation. They had no idea that the most important evidence had come from an unborn baby who'd sacrificed her own extraordinary abilities to save others. "The hospital called this morning," Carmen said carefully. "Isabella's pediatrician wants to schedule follow-up tests, something about genetic markers that might require monitoring." Elena's grip tightened slightly around her daughter. Even in defeat, the system sought ways to categorize and track children whose genetics marked them as potentially useful. Isabella is a normal, healthy baby. Whatever genetic markers they think they've found are irrelevant now. She'll be raised as an ordinary child because that's what she chose to become. Carmen raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Elena's sister had learned not to question the protective intensity that had emerged since Isabella's birth, an almost fierce determination to ensure her daughter's normalcy was respected and preserved. The doorbell rang, interrupting Elena's thoughts. Through the window, she could see Chen standing on the porch, no longer wearing tactical gear but looking somehow more dangerous in civilian clothes. The scars on her face had faded slightly, but her eyes still carried the weight of too many missions that had required impossible choices. "She's been calling every few days," Carmen murmured, "checking on you both. I think she feels responsible." Elena rose carefully, Isabella still sleeping against her chest. Opening the door revealed Chen holding a manila envelope and wearing an expression that mixed relief with lingering concern. "How are you adjusting?" Chen asked, stepping inside and automatically scanning the room's exits, a habit that would probably never fade. "We're learning what normal feels like," Elena replied honestly. "It's stranger than I expected. Quieter." Chen nodded toward Isabella. "Any signs of—" "None. She's exactly what she appears to be, a 3-week-old baby who sleeps too little and eats too much." Elena felt a familiar pang of loss mixed with gratitude. Marcus designed the neural burnout to be complete. Whatever made Isabella special is gone forever. "The envelope contains the final intelligence reports," Chen said, settling into a chair that gave her clear sightlines to both entrances. "The Enhanced Children program has been completely dismantled. Every facility shut down, every researcher reassigned or prosecuted. 47 children are being placed with families who've been thoroughly screened for their commitment to normal upbringings." Elena accepted the envelope but didn't open it immediately. "And Marcus? What do we know now about who he really was?" Chen's expression softened slightly. "He was exactly who you thought he was, Elena. A man who loved his family enough to spend 5 years building safeguards against the people who wanted to exploit them. Every modification he made to Isabella was designed to give her the choice between enhancement and freedom. He knew she'd choose freedom." Isabella stirred slightly in Elena's arms, her tiny fingers grasping at air with movements that were wonderfully, reassuringly random. No purpose beyond the instinctive reflexes of new life, no consciousness beyond what any ordinary baby possessed. Elena realized she'd found something better than closure. She'd found the beginning of a life built on choices rather than genetics, love rather than utility. Isabella would never know the extraordinary abilities she'd sacrificed, but she would grow up knowing that her first act in the world had been choosing her own humanity. The return to ordinary life felt like a gift that could only be fully appreciated by someone who'd almost lost it forever. Chen stood to leave, but paused at the threshold. "There's something else Marcus left for you," she said, pulling a small wooden box from her jacket. "We found it in his real research notes, instructions that it should only be given to you after Isabella was born safely." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she opened the box. Inside was a simple silver locket containing a photo she'd never seen. Marcus holding an ultrasound image, his face radiant with joy and something that looked like relief. On the back, in his careful handwriting, "For Elena and Isabella, may you both choose the extraordinary gift of an ordinary life." After Chen left, Elena sat in the gathering twilight, Isabella nursing peacefully as snow continued to fall outside. The federal agents who'd monitored them for the first week were gone now, satisfied that neither mother nor daughter posed any ongoing security threat. The enhanced children scattered across the country were beginning new lives with families who would never know their extraordinary origins. The congressional hearings would continue for months, but the real work was finished. Carmen appeared with dinner, studying Elena's face in the lamplight. "You're thinking about him again, about what you lost." "About what I found," Elena corrected softly. "I thought loving someone meant knowing everything about them. But Marcus kept secrets that saved lives, saved Isabella's life. I'm learning that love sometimes means trusting someone, even when you can't understand their choices." Isabella finished nursing and gazed up at Elena with unfocused newborn eyes that held no trace of superhuman awareness. Just ordinary consciousness beginning its slow journey toward language, laughter, and all the beautiful mundane milestones that enhanced children were rarely allowed to experience. "She'll ask questions someday," Carmen said. "About her father, about why you moved across the country, about the scars you carry from whatever happened in those mountains." Elena nodded, stroking Isabella's soft hair. "And I'll tell her age-appropriate versions of the truth. That her father was a good man who died protecting people he loved. That sometimes the world is dangerous, but love makes it bearable. That the most important choices aren't always the easiest ones." The evening news droned in the background. More testimony from the congressional hearings, more revelations about the scope of illegal genetic research. Elena no longer watched closely. She'd played her part in exposing the truth, but her real responsibility was simpler and more profound, raising a daughter who would never know she'd once possessed the power to change the world. Over the following weeks, Elena established routines that felt revolutionary in their ordinariness. Pediatrician appointments where Isabella measured perfectly average in all developmental categories. Grocery store visits where she was just another new mother navigating shopping carts and diaper bags. Sleepless nights filled with feedings and lullabies, rather than electromagnetic interference and impossible communications. She found work at Denver General's emergency department, where her colleagues knew her as Dr. Vasquez, the single mother who'd moved from the East Coast for a fresh start. They had no idea she'd once delivered her own baby in an abandoned lodge while bringing down a government conspiracy. The anonymity felt like a luxury she'd never known she craved. Isabella grew according to all normal developmental curves. She smiled at appropriate times, rolled over when expected, babbled meaningless sounds that delighted Elena precisely because they meant nothing more than baby exploration of vocal cords. There were no signs of enhanced intelligence, no electromagnetic sensitivity, no consciousness beyond what any ordinary child possessed at each stage. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Elena had driven toward Timber Creek Lodge, seeking answers about Marcus's death, she sat beside Isabella's crib watching her daughter sleep. The questions that had driven her into those mountains felt distant now, replaced not with answers, but with acceptance that some mysteries were less important than the love they revealed. Isabella stirred and opened her eyes, focusing on Elena's face with the simple recognition of a 6-month-old baby who knew she was safe and loved. No superhuman awareness, no impossible cognitive abilities, just the ordinary miracle of a child who would grow up free to become whoever she chose to be. Elena reached into the crib and lifted her daughter, settling into the rocking chair Marcus had built before his death. Outside, snow began to fall again, but it no longer triggered memories of that desperate drive through the blizzard. Now it was simply weather, beautiful, predictable, ordinary weather that would be gone by morning. "Your father gave us both the greatest gift imaginable," Elena whispered against Isabella's soft hair. "The chance to be perfectly, wonderfully normal." Isabella responded with a contented sigh and nestled deeper into her mother's arms. In choosing humanity over enhancement, she'd freed them both to build a life measured not in extraordinary abilities, but in ordinary moments of love, growth, and the quiet joy of choosing their own path forward. The transformation was complete, not just Isabella's sacrifice of superhuman consciousness, but Elena's evolution from someone who needed answers to someone who'd found peace in questions that didn't require solving. They were ordinary now, and that ordinariness was the most extraordinary gift of all.